Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The fight over vaccinations, suburban growth, and much more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by two journalists covering any range of stories this week. First up is Abigail Warren, who covers Germantown, Collierville, and other issues for us. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Along with Bill Dries, reporter, also at the Daily Memphian. I'll start with what struck me as the biggest story of the week, and I'll go to you a little bit on this, Bill. The state of Tennessee first fired Dr. Michelle Fiskus, who is the top vaccine official at the Tennessee Department of Health. And the state then also announced that it will halt all outreach to adolescents about vaccination, including COVID-19 shots, but also other shots, so measles, mumps, rubella, any sort of vaccinations, HPV. And the state will also stop all vaccinations at clinics on school properties. It will no longer send postcards reminding youth of their second dose of the COVID-19. The reminder cards, the state would be quick to say, will continue to go to parents, and the outreach, they say, will continue to go to parents. But it was a very controversial move, and Dr. Fiskus came out and had nothing good to say about the state's decision.
Her basic point is that the administration, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee, reacted to this because some Republican legislators thought this was moving too fast and thought that children 12 years old and up were going to get the COVID vaccine without their parents' approval. She said it was an overreaction to it and said some other things about the whole situation. Meanwhile, the story has gone national. This has kind of become a microcosm of the national debate that we're still having over the COVID vaccine and over how much of a threat COVID really is. In this case, though, the administration reacted by not only pulling its promotion of the COVID vaccine, they stopped promoting all other vaccines and immunizations that there really has been no debate about.
Yeah, I guess in fringe corners of Facebook, perhaps there's some debate, but it was a year that nationally a whole lot of people didn't get routine exams, didn't get routine vaccinations, didn't get a lot done because either they were afraid to go to their doctor's office, they were afraid because of COVID, and so we did a story on locally, Le Bonheur and many other physicians very concerned about the state doing this. However, Shelby County Health Department runs its own show, and they have been very, I think, vocal in saying they're going to continue to do the outreach they were doing, continue to do clinics in schools, and really basically no change in course. All that happens as the CDC came out with guidance saying that schools should, this is the Center for Disease Control recommending that school districts take an active role and promote vaccines, that they have clinics on campus. It said students age 2 and over should be masked, including older children and staff who haven't gotten a vaccine, some social distancing, 3 feet, ventilation, surveillance testing, basically continuing the course of monitoring, contact tracing, keeping distance. You cover Germantown and Collierville. They have their own school systems. I think we don't know that they've fully announced their reopening fall plans, but we do know how they reacted last year, which was different than Shelby County schools. I mean, all the schools were sort of different. Where did Germantown or Collierville or both of them end the year in terms of their practices about distancing, masking, and so on?
Right. So Germantown and Collierville both decided that masks were optional. Make sure everyone makes their own choice. Do what's best for you. But that was because they wanted to be in line with Shelby County Health Department. That's when Shelby County Health Department lifted the mask ordinance and made them recommended, but saying people who were fully vaccinated did not have to wear them. Now, obviously, that was before the new CDC recommendations came out, and hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll see what their plans are for when they return next month.
I should note, as I talk about schools, we had said last week we'd had Joris Ray, the superintendent of Shelby County Schools, as well as a couple of his staff members booked for the show. He had to cancel. We're hoping to get him back on, as well as some of his staff, to talk about these issues, as well as all the kinds of things going on with schools. But staying with you, Abigail, Well, you covered, I mean, the school board meetings, the town council meetings, everything, throughout COVID. What was the sort of tenor? What was the sort of tone? And again, if you want to speculate, you don't have to. I mean, was there a lot of vaccine resistance? Was there a lot of, vaccine, was it very positive about the vaccine? I mean, just the tone, and especially about the schools, but maybe even more generally.
Well, at first it was really hard for teachers to get a vaccine in Shelby County. So teachers were traveling to other counties. They were going to Lauderdale County, wherever they could to get their vaccine. So a lot of teachers wanted it. They did have a day at Germantown Baptist for Germantown and Collierville teachers to get their vaccines. It didn't seem there was a lot of resistance from teachers that wanted it. They were able to get it. There was some policies that Germantown looked at, specifically with paid time off if they got COVID, that they kind of amended to help encourage staff to get the vaccine.
As we tape this just this morning on Thursday, St. Jude and ALSAC, but St. Jude said that all employees, so I think it's 5,000 local employees, will be required to get vaccines by, I think it's mid-September. If not, they're put on leave. And if they don't get a vaccine, they'll be fired. I think, Bill, that's the first of any major employer I've heard about. I'm sure there were some small businesses we didn't hear about, but who has made it requirement and put that kind of harsh a line on this.
It is the first from employers, but I think this is probably the next big issue for this whole pandemic. Rhodes College, for instance, announcing that students would pay an extra fee if they didn't, if they weren't vaccinating. So I think this is really the next front in this whole discussion that we're having as a society, and really. Up until now, I think the vaccinations have really not been as much a part of this as the masks have. The masks just became a whole symbol of the political divide. No matter how many times health officials talked about it shouldn't be political, it did. And the vaccination efforts that when they cranked up here were running very well in the county outside of the city.
Yeah, and then ran well in the city once the city of Memphis took over. To that end, just again as we're taping this, a new health department director for the Shelby County Health Department has been named. We don't know anything about it, but we'll certainly get on that, and there'll be more to know over the next few days. And I should go back before we move on. I mean, Shelby County's health director, who was on the show a number of times talking pre-COVID and I think even during COVID. There was a wave of health department officials nationally who've been fired. And it's one of the things that Dr. Fiscus from the Tennessee Department of Health noted, that I think some, of the 65 people in her type of position nationally, I think 20 or more had either resigned or been pushed out. And so all this stuff, to say the least, is not over. And you have to wonder, Shelby County, the big counties, the big cities are able to run their own health departments in Tennessee. You have to wonder if when the legislators go into session in January, there won't be at least discussion of restrictions on the autonomy that places like Shelby County have.
Well, there certainly was in the last session earlier this year, and there were several bills that were passed that give the governor some powers and that limit that autonomy to some degree. There will be no doubt more discussion about this.
Let's shift to, there's sort of booming development all over Memphis, Shelby County, the suburbs. We could go through a long list of projects that really didn't stop during COVID. But one of the ones that is most notable in Germantown is the Germantown Country Club. And so, Abigail, I don't know how often country club golf courses get sold and converted. I think that's not necessarily common in the country. It's certainly not common around here. And it is notable, it seems to me, in Germantown because Germantown doesn't have a lot of available land, and it's a higher end community. People move there for the schools, they move there for all kinds of reasons. But to suddenly have this Germantown Country Club available, which you can tell the backstory, is really notable there. But tell the backstory first, and now what's happening.
Yeah, so in late 2018 or early 2019, the country club announced it was closing. It was kind of surprising. A lot of people were shocked to hear that. And the lady that had owned it for a long time had died, and her children were running it and trying to find a way to stay financially sustainable. It just wasn't possible. And so they decided to close it and sell it. There was a company out of Arizona that actually specializes in reconverting golf courses to subdivisions that had a contract on it in mid-2019. When the pandemic hit, they pulled out, citing the pandemic as reasons to quit. And so then Spence Ray, who is a developer in Germantown with McNeil Commercial Real Estate, he put a contract on it with some partners. They're calling themselves Farmington Kimbrough Development Group, and since it sits at the intersection of Farmington and Kimbrough Roads, and Monday they got their outline plan approved for 366 homes. It's a 178-acre piece of property. They're developing about 145 acres. Part of it does sit in the floodplain, which has been a big concern with drainage in Germantown, and so those northern 20 acres are going to remain a conservation area, but he's on track to be able to move forward with homes and turning it into a residential
and this
site.
fits, and we're trying to get Mayor Mike Palazzolo, the mayor of Germantown, will be on sometime once we get the scheduling worked out and have Abigail back on for that. But the Germantown has had this kind of, I mean, it's had a difficult run in terms of development. There was a moratorium on multifamily housing because, I mean, with its limited landlocked nature, it doesn't have any annexation or growth area. It doesn't have a lot of industry. It's got a fair amount of commercial space, but it's mostly a residential community. That's the tax base. And so this conversation, I mean, when was it? We had Mike Palazzolo on some years ago when they were doing the plan, and I've now forgot. It's almost their version of Memphis 3.0. It's their strategic plan for Germantown. Where are they with that? I mean, because it envisioned more walkable streets, it envisioned more bike lanes, it envisioned diminishing, not getting rid of the car, and roads. Does this Germantown development fit in that? And is that still part of the conversation out in Germantown of where we're going and what sort of, with the limited land we have left, what sort of city do we want to be?
I think it is interesting, for sure. When I started covering Germantown, they were in the middle of the apartment moratorium, and that was the talk, and that was a lot of requests. There was Carrefour, there was Thornwood, and the last year they've had a lot of residential requests and less mixed use requests. During the election, there was talk about the Forest Hill Heights area, the land that they have south of Winchester, as Mike Palazzolo calls it, the boot hill of Germantown. How is that going to develop? That was something that some of the aldermen brought up during the election. That's a smart growth node, but some of them said maybe we need to relook at that and think about how we develop that.
You also cover Collierville, where there's a whole lot going on around the town square. There's a lot going on in Collierville generally, but the parking garage in town square is there's the a proposal for it. You tell the story, but I don't know why it struck me, because it's a big deal to put a parking garage in a suburban community, right?
It is.
In this sense.
It is, and there's arguments on both sides. It would be just north of the square, kind of behind Silver Caboose and Brooks Collection, or on that north side. And businesses are overall pretty excited about it, because not only is there a parking garage, but there's a hotel that are part of the plans. And so the hotel can bring businesses. There are a lot of offices that have moved into Town Square recently, which some people don't like because it doesn't give the boutique small shop feel that a lot of people admire about the square. And so right now, Collierville is just studying the land, doing their due diligence. While the shops are excited, there are some residents whose homes are on the National Historic Places Register, and they're not excited because they don't want something that's 3 stories, which is taller than most everything else in Town Square, to be in their backyard, essentially. And so they're worried about the privacy, the lights, the noise, all of the things that can come with a parking garage.
And parking garages, obviously, I mean, Bill, you've covered them. We've talked about them before. I mean, from Overton Square, which I think most developers would say, and the businesses there would say, I'm not crying over the parking garage, and change that whole area and made possible the redevelopment.
Sure, and it is always a big discussion, the balance between parking lots. I mean, the Memphis Zoo has gone through a whole thing where they were considering a parking deck, which is kind of a mid-step between surface parking lot and a parking garage. And look at how that discussion has turned out. It kind of feeds into the whole notion or the whole theory about making communities more walkable. Well, if you're serious about that, do you discourage parking the way that you try to discourage auto traffic coming through? If you do that, then are you going to have enough people to really make it a walkable area. And of course, the whole culture in Memphis, I think up until the last 15 years of this discussion, has been that Memphians historically want to park as close to the door as they can get. And if that means a huge, massive parking lot out in front, not in back, but in front, then that's what they tend to go for. Well, all of that's being rethought now, and it's a new idea for some people. It's a revolutionary idea for other people.
Yeah, and to that end, we'll have Rory Thomas, who's the new head of the Memphis Medical District, on the show in a couple weeks. Memphis Medical District, and led by the sadly now deceased Tommy Pacello, was one of those places that got away from that notion that Tommy had a rant about surface parking lots that was kind of wonderful and majestic, but that you could have walkable streets, you could have bike lanes, you could have outdoor seating areas, you could have pocket parks, and clearly in the medical district that's worked and is found a way. But I'm gonna stay on parking garages. There's another parking garage going downtown. I mean, it is an interesting thing. There's been a lot of bike lanes, a lot of walkability, a real true emphasis on that downtown. If you haven't been downtown in a long time, it's striking. But there's a big parking garage that's going in right across from Beale Street and the Orpheum on what is now a big surface lot.
This is the parking, it's now a surface parking lot that is a block long and wide. This is the parking lot that is between the Orpheum Theater and the end of the Main Street Mall. And it's, on top of that, it's one of 5 parking garages that are basically reconfiguring the downtown parking scheme. The other 4 are existing city parking garages that will be renovated. Some of them will be expanded. This is what they call a mobility center because it will be over 900 parking spaces once the garage is built. But it will also have some retail on the ground level, as is pretty much the custom now with parking garages. And it will also have some facilities there for bicycle riders, for pedestrian traffic, those kind of things, which is why it's being called a mobility center. The Memphis City Council was scheduled to go ahead and vote on this at their last meeting earlier this month in July. They put it off because they want to give this one more look over. There isn't any indication that some of the council members have changed their minds. It's just that they want a closer look at this.
I'll stay with a different type of development, different type of potential construction, and go to Collierville. So another area you cover. They built a new high school 2 years ago, give or take, 2-3 years ago, almost $100 million facility, and they're already, I mean, this is either good, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, it's just they're already talking about needing to expand it.
Yeah, they are. Chairman Wright Cox, the chairman of the school board, his dad was mayor years ago, and he always talks about how his dad would say, point at the teachers and say, you're the reason Collierville's growing. People do move to Collierville for the schools and the public safety. But yeah, the high school was built for 3,000 students, and when Dr. Gary Lilly, the superintendent of schools out there, was giving his presentation to the board of mayor and aldermen about the budget, Mayor Joyner kind of looked at him and said, 3,000 students, that's what we built this school for. So they are having to talk about expanding, what that looks like. At first they just want space, but Dr. Lilly did mention that in a few years they could have a 9th grade academy similar to what Bartlett has to help prepare them better for the rest of their high school career.
The high school is 10th, 11th, 12th right now?
It's 9th through 12th, but they could have a 9th grade academy to kind of better prepare the freshmen for the rest of their high school career.
Gotcha. Speaking, sorry, my voice is dying today. Speaking of schools, we'll have Roblin Webb and Bobby White, who run a number of charter schools in the city. They're on next week to talk about their plans back to this whole notion of, a year of shutdown and coming back full time, it appears, and what sort of learning loss has experienced, all the rules and regulations that were changed at the state level in terms of, not moving third graders forward if they weren't at certain reading levels. All of that we'll talk with Roblin Webb and Bobby White from two of the charter school networks in Memphis next week. And we are, again, we're hoping to have Joris Ray, the superintendent of schools, Shelby County Schools, on this week, and hopefully he will be able to reschedule. Let's stay with a few different things, Bill. The bridge, maybe? I mean, there's just a lot of going on, and we do have Clay Bright from the Tennessee Department of Transportation on the show later in August. hopefully to talk about the bridge reopening. They are, the TDOT and Arkansas Department of Transportation are moving towards an end of July. They haven't promised that, but that's what they're moving toward. They did reveal, they've been pretty close-lipped about what's going on. There was more repairs were necessary than they had expected. That came out, I think, in this week. What else do we know, if anything, about what's going on with the bridge?
The state is still saying that it intends to reopen the bridge, have it ready to reopen at the end of July. So by the time Commissioner Bright is here, they expect the Hernando de Soto Bridge will be open to traffic, and that is a major freight corridor for our city, which is part of Interstate 40, for those who might be new to the city or wondering why all this ado over this bridge over the Mississippi River. There aren't a whole lot of bridges. This is one of the major crossings of the river. But what's happened is the damage that they discovered on the north face of the bridge that prompted the inspectors to immediately grab their phone and call 911 and say, we have to shut down the bridge now on May 11th. That damage was repaired last week. What they did was they went and they looked at all of the different weld spots on the bridge just as a precaution to make sure. And they had a voluminous report, 800 pages on this inspection to make sure the bridge was okay. And their preliminary look, they said, well, we probably need 9 plates because we do see some damage to those other sections unrelated to the break that caused this to shut down. Then when they completed the full review, that number increased to 16. And this is damage that has to be repaired with parts that are fabricated somewhere else and brought here. They weigh a lot, need a crane to put them in place.
Right.
And these parts are made specifically for the bridge, and you can't just slap it on there either. You have to take the stress off of some parts of the bridge that part is going to then inherit. So it's a pretty delicate and complex operation.
I'll stay with you for a second on a story. Was it last week or within the last 2 weeks? We had Sarah Houston, the new executive director for Protect Our Aquifer, on talking about the pipeline and the aquifer generally, which was a very good discussion. But right after we did that show, not because of that show, right after we did that show, the Plains All American, which is the group that was trying to put the oil pipeline through Shelby County in partnership with Valero and some other entities, announced they were not going to do that. And did they give much of an explanation of why?
Well, what was notable about their statement was that they didn't make any mention of the protest and the enormous public opposition to the pipeline project. They said in a very brief statement that was part of an SEC filing for the company too, that basically they think there is a lower demand for fossil fuel as a result of the pandemic. So in essence, they said we're changing course because of the pandemic. And also indicated that they still have concerns about the ordinances the City Council and County Commission are considering. This is not going to stop the City Council and the County Commission from voting on these measures. Just because the pipeline route through Southwest Memphis has been called off by Plains All American, the Council and Commission are pretty much committed to go to votes on this starting next week. And
you did a real good story this last week, I think it was in the last week, on how it was the possibility, and this sounds like a strange segue, but it was MLGW, it was TVA really building the new power plant, and its use of water and drilling holes in the aquifer that really brought so many of these things to the surface, a bad analogy there, of the aquifer that isn't regulated. There weren't a whole lot of regulations. You could do kind of sort of what you wanted in terms of drilling into it. TVA is in the news again because, and MLGW, the city is about to, or did it already just put out its RFP for potential, it's not for potential replacements, it's an RFP to study potential replacements for TVA. Right. Is that correct?
To take offers from companies, and this specific RFP, request for proposal, is one of 3 that are part of the process. This is the most complex process that will take the most time to evaluate the different offers that come in. It's around what does a transmission system look like for electric power to Memphis Light, Gas and Water if TVA is no longer the supplier of electric power to the city. But to your point about the piece we did about the movement, this has been very interesting. We've talked on this show a lot about the last 7 years of what we've called new activism in this city, from the Greensward protest in 2014 which segued right into this whole concern about where is TVA going to get the water it's going to use in this $1 billion natural gas-fired power plant in southwest Memphis, where the pipeline route wound up being proposed. And it spawned this organization called Protect Our Aquifer. And what we've got, starting really with that whole TVA plant issue right up into the pipeline, is in a city that's had an environmental movement notable for stopping an interstate from coming through Overton Park, we now have that kind of effort, which is also focused on a legal battle primarily around specifically the city's water system.
Yeah. We're out of time. We want to mention for a second, but that the new Ida B. Wells statue was unveiled. You did an interview with the author of a new biography of Ida B. Wells. It's available on the Daily Memphian site as audio. We were going to talk a little more, but we ran out of time. Abigail, thanks for being here. We'll get you back on. Thanks for doing this. And thank you for watching. Please join us again next week.